life has become a spectator sport in our culture. And taking life back with our actions and stepping out and riding the bike and doing this thing and consuming the media that we choose, pull versus push, that the powers that be and the advertisers that had kind of taken over since the 50s, the same people that took the chemicals and dumped them into our foods and into our lives, also took over the airwaves. And now that this thing called the internet is liberating that, we have options in how we consume our information, how we consume our media, and therefore we can kind of free ourselves from that and choose how we consume our cosmetics, our food, everything that goes into our lives. And when people start to do that, they start eking back vitality from every little aspect of these until you start to feel alive again. And then you have the clarity to make better and better choices and wake up and be a part of the solution, not the problem. And that's why I'm really excited about this living room right here.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Quite so. I mean, it's almost like getting feeling back after been to the dentist or something, right? It's like,
I've been biting my cheek all day.
Yeah, no wonder. I mean, it really is anesthetizing so much of modern culture. And I have to, you mentioned spectator sports. I've been. I'm not someone who watches a lot of sports, and I think one reason I do is because when I see the exploits on the field, and I see, of course, how impossibly talented and skilled and strong and fit all of these people are, I'm not drawn to it. I'm thinking, oh, I have got to get out and move. Right,
nice.
But I don't think but that's just me, and I it's like one of my few good qualities. That's my reaction, and I should move more. But I find that whole complex to be very as dispiriting to me as the chemical industry, to see all of these people lined up, on their couches or in the bleachers or whatever, and instead of having the joy of play, we're supposed to play sports. It's a game, and yet it's taken on the one hand so seriously as a business, and then it has this mesmerizing sort of zombie effect on the observers, on the onlookers. That it seems like the more we invest in these stadiums and these athletic programs in schools and so forth, the less we actually are realizing realizing our potential to play. So anyway, pet peeve of mine. We don't work on organized sports, but maybe we'll open up a new division at EWG.
Yeah, and that's compounded by the fact that these very same people who are doing miraculous things are pawning off hoagies, pizza, tacos,
nachos,
and sugar water.
They're
selling it. To you as they're jumping up and doing this.
Yeah, with probably a few performance enhancing drugs in some cases, aiding them to overcome the impact of the sugar and all.
Well, if they're having it at all.
If they're having it at all,
which is a whole different conversation.
I know specifically these energy drink sports athletes that specifically have in their contracts that they are not going to drink that stuff. Right, they will stand for it. They'll wear the hats.
They'll take the money, but they're not going to drink it.
They'll have a can. They'll put water in there, and they'll drink the water because they know better than to take that stuff. But all these kids aspiring to come up and skateboard and surf and all this stuff, they're drinking this crack in a can poison, right? And they're not even realizing that the avatars that they're trying to gravitate to would be insane to drink that stuff. Right?
And they themselves won't ever be the professional athletes, but they'll be left with that habit.
Oh, they'll be obese. They'll be obese by the time they're 13.
Sugar. Right? They're exposed to a number of other chemicals. They're getting a large dose of caffeine usually, which is not always a good thing. I think it's so important, this point that you made about engagement, because we're coming back to engagement again. And how do you present value the way that you really want your life to be? How do you present value it so that you're making those small decisions, the keystone habits, that really kind of carry you along? And I loved your point also, Abel, about the way that marketing makes you feel less than. Like, oh, I need red lipstick. I'm not quite who I think I could be with the red lipstick. Or, the way that I think of antidepressants as being, you don't have a Prozac deficiency. That's not what we need to be addressing here. So how do we really help people with present valuing the decisions before they get the serious diagnosis, before they drink too much to self-medicate and get into a car accident, before they get a cancer diagnosis. How do we get them, how do we help?
It's the key question to me. And there are lots of ways to approach it. I think you really have to offer different ways in, because there are so many different ways in which people are kind of trapped in their current behaviors, and we all have them, right? So one way I think is to kind of peel back the curtain and let people see the artifice and the way in which the manipulation is taking place. Or just as you were saying about, we have to have deodorant, and we have to have the latest deodorant, or we have to have a razor blade with like 9 blades on it now, right? Because that's really the only way to shave.
8 blades is so 5 minutes ago.
That's exactly right. I mean, you could leave a microgram of hair on your face with only 8 blades.
And how shameful would that be?
That's right. How could you go on? And so I think pulling back the artifice. Secondly, we've talked about it. Give people very doable, practical steps that don't make them feel either intimidated or ashamed about what they've been doing all along.
Good.
Right? We've all been fooled. We've all been fooled, and we've all got pieces that we need to pick up, re-examine, and say, you know what, you're right. That I really do notice a difference on a third glass of wine. So am I never going to have a third glass of wine again? No. I am going to have a third glass of wine any number of times in my life going forward, but I'm just not going to do it tonight.
Good.
And so I feel like this is where, to me, it's an exciting blend. I mean, environmentalists aren't supposed to talk about this, are they? We don't talk about wine. Well, we should.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if you believe that the environment is something that we metabolize, as well as something that we see,
Conversation.
right? Then it completely changes your notion of these external influences that we call the environment, or you used to call nature versus nurture. It completely changes that, and you realize, just as scientists are realizing, that it's not really nature versus nurture. It's not really the environment with respect to your future and your inheritance. It's the interaction of the two. Yes. So where are all those interactions? Well, it's in everyday life. It's when you're driving your car. It's when you're breathing air in your home. It's when you're eating. This is your environment, and it's also the wilderness expedition, and it's also the smokestacks, and it's also the oil spill. It's all those things too. But if you're not living in New Orleans, you may not have experienced either the hurricane in any way that stuck with you, or the catastrophic oil platform leak. You still have a critical engagement with the environment, and I think that's another way to. The more we personalize it and make it day to day, I think the more likely we are to give people that moment when they wake up even before they've gotten sick, or even before they've started a family. They just wake up because they've come out of a dream. They've come out of a trance.
I love this. So you're talking about the gap between intention and behavior. And I actually think you're an incredible healer, because you're talking about how to close that gap in a way that doesn't cause shame.
Yeah.
And that really lands with me in a powerful way. It also reminds me of the patients I've worked with over the years who've struggled with their weight. And I can tell you, I've struggled with my weight. A lot of people know that story. I know so much what it feels like when you're trying to lose weight, and no matter what you do, you can't do it. Yeah. And so many men and women get told, often by their well-meaning doctor, just exercise more and eat less. And what we know, the latest science, is that actually that doesn't work. And there's a few other reasons why it doesn't work. One of them is endocrine disruptors. So I'm hoping we could talk a little bit about that. I mean, we've gotten some really new, interesting data showing that certain endocrine disruptors cause insulin resistance, make your cells numb to insulin, make you store fat like crazy. We have Fat Burning Man here. And I feel like we should talk about this. Like, let's give some really practical tips about this point of endocrine disruptors and how they could be making you fat and tired and cranky and maybe causing breast cancer. So
and why are we figuring this out only now? And there's an interesting, I think, construct that people, in the environmental health field know about, but a lot of other people don't, which is, at the very beginning of the concern about the impact of pollution and chemicals on our health, we were looking at a very narrow range of health effects. And of course, the big one we looked at first was cancer. And so we tried to develop all kinds of chemical review systems, animal studies, and other steps that are taken in the approval process for some products to see if they're carcinogenic. We also looked, in the case of lead, again, belatedly, we tried to see the impact on intelligence, the ability, motor skills, and so forth. But again, this was decades and decades. In the case of lead, centuries after the exposures began, going back to ancient Rome. So what you're talking about now is something that we really should have as the kind of filter before chemicals or products are allowed to come into the market.
Yes.
How might they affect our biology?
Yes.
Even if we can't predict that something that we see in a laboratory is going to happen on a massive scale and lead to health problems in people, just seeing it should be enough to tell us, we should be cautious. Well, we're not.
Yeah.
We're not. These things are on the market, they're used for decades, they're in all of us before we even begin to study them. And this whole idea of an obesogen, a chemical agent that's artificial in a product that you might buy, you might be exposed through the contamination of food, you might be exposed through some sort of kitchenware or air pollutant or something else in your home. No one ever bothered to ask what some of the other biological effects might be. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you talk to doctors who treat patients who are having difficulty getting pregnant or carrying it to full term, they're just now beginning to understand that there could be all kinds of chemical agents that we ought to have been looking at all along that explain lower sperm counts, lower motility, movement of an activity of the sperm, or that might be compromising the eggs that every girl is born with.
That's right.
Right?
And there's brand new data on this.
Yes.
So brand new data that just came out a couple of months ago, making this even more specific. That when you look at women who are trying to get pregnant, who are undergoing in vitro fertilization, that their level of phthalates, one of the xenoestrogens, one of the fake estrogens, the women with the highest levels have the fewest eggs. Yeah. They have higher miscarriage rates. So we've known for a long time that phthalates track with endometriosis, which is one of the causes of infertility in women. We also have newer data about men and early puberty in men related to phthalate and other xenoestrogen levels. So I think it's so important for us to really know on a practical level that this is not some obscure information that's not relative to your life. Really, no matter where you are in your life cycle, this is relevant.
That's right. And we simply don't have the regulatory framework that common sense tells us we should have to filter out these concerns at the front end.
Yes.
And as a consequence, we are in this complete, it's really not fair to call it an experiment because there are no controls. We have just introduced all of these chemicals into our lives without any idea really in most cases how they affect us individually, much less in their combinations. So you're absolutely right. And obesogens is this notion that you could be ingesting a chemical, breathing it, drinking it, eating it in your food, and it's fooling your body.
Yes.
It is tricking eons of hereditary, evolutionary intelligence and biology, and completely able like that to trick your body into thinking it's something that resembles a normal hormone.
I call them party crashers. Exactly. So they get into your body, they seem like they were invited to the party, and then they start having sex with your receptors, and it's a real problem.
Yes.
And it starts to, you have this innate intelligence in your body that was never intended to meet up with these party crashers, and the party crashers just cause all kinds of problems. They block the innate intelligence of your body.
Yeah, and then they're passed out in your living room the next morning.
That's right.
Exactly.
They're still there.
They're still there.
They're in your fat cells. They don't go away.
That's exactly right.
So speaking of fooling your body, Ken, I would love to talk about the bizarre and amazing connection between the chemical industry and what's in people's food. Because some of these chemicals are basically remarketed, pesticides in some cases, remarketed and embraced in diet foods, in foods that are supposed to make you slim. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between something that might be invented to be a pesticide that they find is sweet and can be marketed into food?
there are unfortunately a lot of stories like this. Elements that are in sports drinks and that really are used in other contexts as bug killers.
Yeah.
And I think
bug killers.
Yeah. I think the only real way to explain it to people is that when you have a regulatory system that is as permissive and permeable as in many cases ours is. I mean, actually, the tragedy is one of the most regulated areas where the most pre-market testing has to be done is on pesticides. You're required to go through a lot of health and safety studies to either keep an old one on the market or introduce a new one into commerce, because they are designed to kill. And so Congress and regulatory agencies have thought, okay, well, if something's designed to do that, we ought to take some extra precautions. We are never entirely satisfied that we take enough precautions at Environmental Working Group with those chemicals. But we do know that compared to some of the other industrial categories, we test them more thoroughly. But once you get the opportunity to take a portion of a molecule from one category like pesticides and modify it maybe slightly and utilize it in another category, you're in a different federal agency they have a different set of rules, much less rigorous for food additives, for example, or food ingredients than pesticides. I mean, we've been telling people, don't you think children's toys should be as safe as pesticides?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And I mean, just for starters,
it's a preposterous question, but
it is.
But the fact that we're even talking about that is tragic.
No, that's right. But the reality is, we have a lot of compounds that are developed by big chemical companies that they see as building blocks for all kinds of profit centers. And it doesn't really matter until the regulatory system catches up to them or until a problem emerges. It doesn't really matter. I mean, we had PCBs that we were told were essential to the electrical grid because it's a chemical that actually is very good at managing heat and insulating or giving off heat, as the case may be. And so we built it. Monsanto produced this chemical for decades. It was all over the country. And now it's in the Hudson River, it's in waste dumps all around, and it's in all of us still. It's still in kids. We tested newborn babies, their umbilical cord blood, in 2004. We were still finding breakdown products of PCBs that were banned in 1976.
Wow. So
the real problem is systemic. Chemicals are not seen as once they're regulated for one use as deserving necessarily heightened attention in another completely different use.
Right.
And that's really the tragedy.
Yeah, because to me there's a fundamental difference between something that is supposed to kill things, kill life, and something that sweetens a soda.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Or that has no calories, because how can you measure the calories that are in something that's pure chemicals that's meant to kill?
Yeah.
Right? And that's all of a sudden spun as the advantage of this new product because it has zero nutritional value.
Right. And again, these are people who are very excited about government in Washington, the people who want these things in our food. They love it. they can't. They think the government is working just beautifully because they know how to manipulate it. They're paid to do it. There are thousands and thousands of them in the companies and in Washington whose job it is to navigate the regulatory system and keep it feeble. Keep it in a weakened condition so that it really can't act like what we need, which is an immune system for society, for consumer protection. We ought to have something kicking in here that says, "Whoa, this is an alien enterprise. Well, let's respond to it." But our social immune system's been degraded. It's not picking up the signals because there's no one there that makes sure that happens.
Yeah, and it's not always the people who are supposed to be policing themselves. We know pretty well that doesn't always work, right?
Yeah.
And so I have an example that was personal to me that really opened my eyes years ago, and I was working as a consultant with consumer companies in the food and beverage space, and there was one artificial creamer company that we're talking to about marketing, and I just making small talk, I was like, well, what is your favorite flavor? Is it the Irish cream flavor or the raspberry, whatever they had? And they said, oh, Abel, we don't touch that stuff. It's all chemicals. And it is shocking the disconnect that you find between sometimes these industries where they know full well that it's not really food. But hopefully it's not going to cause damage enough that it would impact market share or something like that.
Or cause liability.
Or cause liability. Right.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're to the point where that's your level of confidence that you're allowed to bring products to the market right up to the point where you might be sued, I would argue that's a problem. That's a bit of a hair trigger that we ought to work back from.